Grab your favorite beverage. It's time for the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast.
What's up, fantasy freaks and geeks? Welcome to part one of the Week 10 episode of the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. We are going to be running through the AFC home games here on this episode, finishing off with the Thursday night game between the Los Angeles Chargers and the Oakland Raiders. We're going to start this episode off with the battle for New York. Two horrible teams, a 2-7 team visiting a 1-7 team. I want to start going off with Chris Herndon. He was active last week, but he never stepped foot on the field. With Ryan Griffin playing well, he's had 8 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4, at least 8 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4 games. I'm afraid that when Herndon does actually get back onto the field, that he's not going to be stepping right into a big workload, which is, I think, what a lot of people were expecting him to do. I've been waiting all freaking season for this guy. He had that 4-game suspension, and then he had a hamstring injury, and it's been horrible. As a Jet fan, I've been waiting and looking forward to seeing him play because he was great last year, and I really think that that him and Darnold, are going to do good things if they can just get on the field together. And the Jets pass game has another great matchup this week, but I'm not all that confident it's going to matter. The Jets offense is just completely lost. They looked horrible in a game last week against one of the worst defenses in the league, one of the worst teams in the league. They looked very bad. Le'Veon gave us 16 points last week, which is nice. We'll take that. But on 25 touches versus the most generous defense to running backs going into Week 9, a lot was made about Le'Veon coming back this season. Having an entire season off. Oh, he's going to have fresh legs. He should be getting us way more. We should be getting more out of him in a game where he got 9 targets and 17 carries. Watching this game as a miserable Jets fan that I am, I'm afraid that this combo of one of the worst offensive lines and one of the most historically patient runners in Le'Veon Bell, it's just a horrible matchup, or a horrible match, between the two of them. I don't know. It's not looking good, man. Plus, again, such a great matchup to see Darnold and Robbie Anderson only connect on 2 of 4 passes was also a bit unsettling. Anderson's targets per game and his air yards per game are down from last year. So this offense is not using Robbie Anderson like he's been used over the past couple years. I don't know if that's an Adam Gase thing or what it is, but he's just not as involved as he was last year. His thing is his explosiveness, his ability to go out and catch those deep passes, and it's just not happening this year. Looking at the Giants here, Golden Tate with his lowest target share since his Week 5 debut, and Sterling Shepard should be coming back any week now. But now that it is confirmed that Evan Ingram will be missing this week's game, he's got a foot injury. I think he's going to get a second opinion from Dr. Andrews, which is never a good thing. So even if Sterling Shepard does return, I think Golden Tate is still going to be a safe play. I think he's going to be even better now that Evan Ingram's not going to be playing. So last week, the Cowboys defense actually did a really good job on containing Saquon Barkley, holding him to just 2 yards per carry. and 65 of Barkley's 67 pass yards came on that one long screen pass in the fourth quarter. This was by far Saquon's worst game as a pro besides the Week 3 game that he left with that hamstring injury. I'm betting he has a bounce-back game versus the Jets, who actually now allow the most receptions and the most receiving yards to running backs this year. So, again, with Evan Ingram out, maybe they try and use Saquon a little bit more in the pass game. He did have 8 targets last week, which tied on the team for the team high in targets with Evan Ingram. So I don't know how much more they can use him, but I'm sure they'll figure that out. So I'm playing Saquon. I'm playing Golden Tate, and if Sterling Shepard's active, I'm playing him too. On the Jets side, I think you got to keep putting Le'Veon out there and hoping that one of these 20-touch games will actually give you a big game. And with Jamison Crowder tied with Le'Veon last week in targets and receptions, it seems like Jamison Crowder is the wide receiver that you want for my New York Football Jets. All right, next game is another NFC team visiting an AFC team. We got the Rams at the Steelers. Rams coming off of a bye. Looking back, Sean McVay is now 2-0 coming off of a bye as the head coach of the Rams. I know it's a small sample size, but it's something. 2 weeks ago, after Brandon Cooks left the game with a concussion, we saw Cooper Kupp racked up 220 yards. He had 124 yards after the catch, which is pretty ridiculous. I'm not saying that Cooper Kupp will have another 200-plus yard game, but off the bye, I expect this offense to look more like they did last year than they have this year. With the extra week of rest, you got to figure we'll hopefully see a big game, a big workload game for Todd Gurley, who has still yet to have a game with over 101 total yards. No games this season with over 19 touches. Although this is a tough matchup for him, I think we'll see Gurley have a big game. With an extra week off, I think they're going to say, hey, you got the rest. Let's go out there and let's give you 20-plus touches in this game. And they're going to need it, especially if there's no Brandon Cooks, who I think he's still dealing with, was it a concussion maybe? I'm not exactly sure. Looking at the Steelers, Vance McDonald was the only one to score a touchdown, an offensive touchdown for the Steelers last week. And it was a wild game for Jalen Samuels. He only had 10 yards on 8 carries, but he had 73 receiving yards on 13 catches, 13 targets, which is absurd. I'm not saying I'm sorry. And he looked pretty good. He had one really nice long run, and I'm screwing up here. I got all my notes all messed up. So Jalen Samuels, 13 targets, caught all of them for 73 yards. By far the most targeted player on the team. And we saw Trey Edmonds carry the ball 12 times for 73 yards, and he looked pretty good. So I'm not saying go out and start Trey Edmonds, but I think he did enough to keep Jalen Samuels' carries down, especially after he only gave you 10 yards on 8 carries. Maybe they just say, screw it, we're not even going to let you run the ball. We're just going to throw you the ball every time. And Samuels is not going to get 13 targets a game. He's never had more than 8 in a game except for last week. And the Rams, they do allow the 9th most receiving yards to running backs. So I do think that Samuels will have another good game as far as the yardage goes if James Conner were to miss another week. I think if Conner misses, Samuels is definitely an RB1. And if Conner does play, I'm still willing to play Jalen Samuels in my flex solely because of how much he was using in the passing game, and how well he does when you throw him the ball 13 times. He catches every single one of them. It's kind of hard not to throw that in your game plan. He played well. He played really well. He also fumbled, which kind of sucks, but it is what it is. Juju, not a very good game. 3 catches on 5 targets for only 16 yards. I'm getting kind of worried about him. I think he's still play him as a wide receiver too, but definitely his inconsistency is bothering me. And Vance McDonald this week, I think he's worth a play as well. When you look at the Rams, they they don't really do anything great on defense, but they don't do anything really all that bad either. So this should be a pretty good game. I'm excited about this game. All right, moving on to the Dolphins at the Colts. So this was the first game in the past 2 years where Ryan Fitzpatrick had over 28 pass attempts and didn't throw an interception. And, of course, it was against my pathetic New York Jets. He seemed to be developing a chemistry with the rookie Preston Williams, who's been averaging 7-8 targets a game in the games that Fitz started. But he tore his ACL. He's out for the season. So that really sucks for the Dolphins. They're also going to be without Mark Walton for the next 4 games because he was suspended for, I guess he got arrested a bunch of times or whatever the hell it was. So if you added him, with a desperation hope of a, volume upside RB3, whatever, I think you can drop him now. Unless the Fish add another running back, it looks like Kalen Ballage is going to be in line to be the primary ball carrier. And he doesn't really have all that great of a matchup. The Colts allow the 9th fewest fantasy points to running backs. They're really good at defending pass-catching running backs as well. So not a good matchup for Kalen Ballage. So I'm not starting him, even though seems like he is going to be the only guy that they have running the ball. And plus, Ballage has only caught 4 of his 12 targets this season. And Fitz is not really a quarterback that's going to dump passes off to his running backs. He's a gunslinger. He wants to push the ball down the field. I don't see him having a Curtis Samuel game with 13 targets. I'm not playing him. The one guy that is interesting for the Dolphins now, especially the fact that they're going to be without their number 1 wide receiver, they're going to be without their top running back. Last week, it was the game I've been waiting for all season for Mike Gesicki. Caught all 6 of his targets for 95 yards. He was second on the team in targets and air yards. And with Preston Wilson out for the season, I expect Gesicki to get at least half of the targets that Williams was getting, especially this week. The Colts allow the 10th most fantasy points to tight ends. So they're up there. So it's a good matchup for him. It's a good situation for him. He's got the talent, and he's got the quarterback that likes to throw the ball down the field. So I think in this week of 6 teams on bye, I think you can get away with throwing Mike Gesicki into your lineup. Looking at the Colts, so Jacoby Brissett started the game off 4 for 5. He fumbled twice, but they didn't lose any of them. What sucks for him is that he had his offensive lineman step on him and kind of roll his ankle, and then he took a step and he had another offensive lineman roll up onto him and hurt his knee. It looked very painful. It looked like it was not very much fun. So Brian Hoyer is now going to start for them, and he came in and threw 3 touchdowns. He also threw a pick, and he lost a fumble. So that's not very good. And also, it looks like the team is going to be without T.Y. Hilton again. So last week, Jack Doyle, he's only scored 2 touchdowns this season, but they were both in games where T.Y. Hilton did not play. So, with Hilton out again, I think Doyle is going to be another good play versus the Dolphins. Even with Brian Hoyer at QB, when Hoyer came into the game early in the second quarter, actually played really well, and he threw 3 touchdowns, and one of them was to Jack Doyle. He did throw a pick while targeting Jack Doyle, so that's it sucks that he threw a pick, but it's nice that he's giving Jack Doyle those opportunities. And that pick was the one that Minkah Fitzpatrick turned into a touchdown. 3 of Zach Pascal's 5 catches were for 50 of his 76 yards, and those three catches all came with Brian Hoyer. So again, with no T.Y. Hilton, I think Zach Pascal's not a horrible start either. Dolphins allow the 7th most fantasy points to wide receivers. Especially like Zach Pascal in FanDuel this week because I'm sure he's going to be dirt cheap. So that's Dolphins and Colts. Moving on to the Ravens and the Bengals. This should be a bloody game. So the Ravens put a whooping on the Pats last week. They had 4 more first downs than the Patriots did. The Pats had more penalties, which is very, very odd. They're usually the team that commits the fewest penalties. Actually, last year in the Super Bowl, I won a little bit of money on a prop bet. I bet that the Rams would have more penalty yards than the Patriots, and I was right. Also, the Ravens were better on third down. They had a higher third down conversion rate. The Ravens won the time of possession by 15 minutes, which is pretty ridiculous to do against a defense that has looked really good all season. But as we've talked about for the past couple weeks, the Patriots' schedule has been ridiculously easy. So the Patriots, what they do, it's been talked about a lot. They take away what you do best. And Lamar Jackson, what he does best as far as in the passing game goes, is he targets his tight ends. And the Patriots did not take that away. The tight ends last week accounted for 48% of the targets. The running backs and the tight ends accounted for 70% of Lamar Jackson's completions. So he was definitely, dumping the ball off and hitting those tight ends on those easy reads. Marquise Brown led the team in receiving with 48 yards. Lamar Jackson with only 117 air yards. So they were not pushing the ball down the field. They were running the ball. They were taking the easy completions, and they won. They won big, 37-20. So I don't think there's any reason to think that this team can't continue to win this way. You hear a lot of talking heads saying, there's no way that this offense will be able to, survive in the playoffs. You look at what happened to Lamar Jackson last year in the playoffs, but he was also a rookie last year, and the team was a little different than it is right now. The Ravens ran the ball 41 times for 210 yards. They averaged over 5 yards per carry. Seemed like the Patriots were just kind of playing contain all game and tried to keep Lamar Jackson from being a target or from being a threat with his arm. But he showed he only really needs to make 15 to 20 throws if you're going to let him just run all over for, I think he had 60 yards, which is not very much to his standard. So start Mark Ingram, start Lamar Jackson, obviously, start Marquise Brown. Honestly, start Mark Andrews, and I don't think you can go wrong with starting any one of these touchdowns or any one of these Ravens tight ends if you're in a bind. They're getting the targets, they're getting the work, and this offense is pretty awesome. So I think you can get away with any one of them, but especially Mark Andrews. He's been one of the best tight ends all season. Looking at the Bengals, 0-8, AJ Green. There were reports that he will most likely make his debut this week, but I'm recording today on Wednesday, and he did not practice today. Apparently, according to one of the beat writers up there, the head coach said that his ankle wasn't feeling right. So I don't know whether or not AJ Green's ever really going to come back. An 0-8 team, is it really worth risking re-injuring, one of your best wide receivers in 0-8 season? It's over. I mean, there's a reason why they're starting this backup quarterback, because the season's over already. But if AJ Green does return and he's he returns and he plays every game out, I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens to the target share of these fellow Bengal wide receivers. Tyler Boyd's right now sitting at a 24% share, which will probably shrink down to 18%. Auden Tate's 16% will probably shrink down closer to 10%. Alex Erickson has a 12% target share so far this season. I expect that to go completely away. I think AJ Green's going to take all that, especially considering head coach Zach Taylor comes from the Sean McVay tree. They love that 11 personnel, which is 3 wide receivers on the field. So I don't know how much playing time Alex Erickson's really going to get. But I am excited to get Green back, although we'll see just how startable he'll be going forward into the final quarter of the fantasy season. And especially we'll see what this new quarterback Ryan Finley actually looks like and whether or not he can sustain a top wide receiver like AJ Green. All right, next game is the Buffalo Bills at the Cleveland Browns. 6-2 team versus a 2-6 team. Devin Singletary with as many carries last week as he had in the first 4 games combined. I think coming off of that embarrassing loss, they wanted to focus on running the ball. Singletary with 4 carries on the Bills' first 8-play drive. Then he had 4 of the first 5 plays coming out of the half. Hopefully this is the norm going forward. We don't need another year of Frank Gore killing his fellow running back teammates and as far as their fantasy stock goes. Another good thing that I saw with Devin Singletary is that he got 6 carries in the fourth quarter. All of the RB touches that went to all the fourth quarter RB touches went to Singletary. He looked awesome. He had 95 yards and a touchdown on 20 carries. He also caught 3 of his 4 targets for 45 yards. So he had a pretty nice stat line. And you're going to play John Brown again, of course, and Cole Beasley with his fewest targets on the season. Not worried, though, because it was obviously a heavy run game plan. But I don't know if this game is going to be that the same. You know, the Browns do allow the 9th most fantasy points to running back, so we could see another big game from Devin Singletary, but Beasley keeps playing really well, and in a full point PPR league, I think in a week where you have 6 teams on bye, you can go. There's not many options, and if you're really hurting at wide receiver, I think Cole Beasley is not the worst option. Looking at the Browns, they tried to dink and dunk all game. OBJ and Jarvis Landry had a combined 100 air yards. Not a big game plan with that below average offensive line and the pass defense of the Broncos. The problem was that OBJ saw the lowest target share of the year, and Landry caught less than half of his team-high 13 targets. He finished with 6 for 51 and a touchdown, but only 4 yards per target. When you're getting 31% of the target share on the day, you got to play better than that. And it's looking more and more like Odell Beckham is a bust, at least this year in fantasy. Maybe if the Browns can, build a professional-looking offensive line, maybe we'll see what this combination of Baker Mayfield and this group of wide receivers can really look like. This is the week that we will get to see Kareem Hunt back. We'll see what happens with him and Nick Chubb. Chubb has been getting, 20-plus touches a game every game. So we'll see, whether that shrinks down to 15 or 16 or if they do a full-on split. The dude hasn't played football in well over a year, so I don't know how they're going to just throw him right back into the mix. But we'll have to see what happens. Have to see how that shakes out in Cleveland. All right, the next game we got the Chiefs at the Titans, which should be a pretty cool game. For the Titans, Malcolm Butler is now on IR with a broken wrist. He was one of their better defenders, so you got to figure that defense is going to take a hit. Damian Williams had one of the best games a Kansas City running back has had all season. He had the one long 91-yard touchdown, which was nice, but on his other 13 touches, he only had 37 yards. Honestly, the only thing I learned from that Damian Williams long run is just how incredibly fast Tyreek Hill is. He caught up from behind him to help block. Tyreek Hill showed even without Mahomes, he is still as safe of a play as there is in fantasy football. Tyreek Hill, 6 catches on 8 targets for 140 yards and a touchdown. He's just absolutely awesome. But getting back to Damian Williams, I found it odd that in a close game, all game, that LaShawn McCoy only had 4 touches. But I still don't think Damian has solidified himself as the go-to number 1 running back. I don't think we're ever going to see one guy get a huge majority of the work. This team signed LaShawn McCoy for a reason, so I'm waiting another week before I start Damian Williams as an RB1. I think you can get away with him as an RB2 or a flex for sure, but to count on him as like a, put him in your lineup and keep him there for the rest of the season. I'm going to need to see another week of it, especially in this matchup with the Titans. I know with 6 teams on bye, that might, it's going to be hard to fill out your rosters this week. But Damian Williams, these running backs are just going to be a confusing, annoying thing all season. Looking at the Titans, Derrick Henry, 1 yard short of 100 total yards. He did have 2 touchdowns. Derrick Henry had 10 of his 16 touches in the third quarter after only 3 touches in the first half. The Panthers had allowed the 5th most fantasy points to running backs going into Week 9. Why they only let Derrick Henry touch the ball 3 times in the first half, I don't know. But I think they're going to learn from that last week. Tannehill, 2 interceptions. They let him throw the ball, 39 times. So I think they're going to kind of come out and try and really focus on the run. Last week, I thought the Vikings were going to absolutely run the ball down the throat of the Chiefs with how bad the Chiefs' run defense has been, how many running backs have had great games against the Chiefs, and it just didn't happen. The Chiefs' defense came to play. They held Dalvin Cook and Alex Mattison to 76 rushing yards on 24 carries. This was particularly frustrating to me because on FanDuel I had Dalvin Cook as one of my anytime touchdown scorers. I figured it was a shoo-in. I thought he was definitely going to score against this team that has just been absolutely gashed by running backs all season, but it didn't happen. So hopefully it happens this week. I think the Titans are going to look at what other teams have done to the Chiefs and say there's no way we can't give Derrick Henry at least 20 touches in this game. I think that's the formula to winning, and I think numerous teams have showed that's how you can beat the Chiefs. All right, last game of the night here. We got the Chargers going to the Raiders. This is the Thursday night game. So I figured with Anthony Lynn now calling plays that we'd see the Chargers run the ball more, and that's what they did. 35 rushing attempts on the day last week against the Packers' really bad run defense. Phillip Rivers with his lowest pass attempts on the season, but his highest completion percentage on the season. I expect the Chargers to try and use the same game plan this week against the Raiders. The Raiders right now, actually, they're not all that bad against running backs. The Raiders don't have a bad run D, but 5 of their 8 opponents ran the ball 20 times or less, and those 5 teams all had under 80 rushing yards. The 3 opponents that did run the ball over 20 times averaged 117 rush yards in those 3 games. So I think we see the Chargers run the ball over 20 times. Eckler with only 4 targets last week, 3 less than his season average. Eckler only 2 games this season with more carries, both when Melvin Gordon was out. So, like I said last week. So last week the combo of Melvin Gordon and Austin Eckler had 32 carries. I think they're gonna use that formula outline. Run the ball over 20 times against this defense, and you'll probably get a win. Looking at the real quick, actually, 66 yards after the catch from Mike Williams. He had a 56-yard catch and run on a short slant. He had a 46-yard catch on a deep pass in the middle of the field. He's been playing great while Keenan Allen has not been playing great. So this is definitely pretty frustrating. Keenan Allen last week, you look at what he did. In the first quarter, he had 2 targets. In the second quarter, he had 1 target. And on the first drive of the third quarter, he had his last target of the day. So they got away from him. Meanwhile, Hunter Henry had 10 targets. I think the change in philosophy with the new play caller, I think with Phillip Rivers getting a little older and with his love of dumping the ball off to his running backs and his tight ends, I think Keenan Allen's best days are behind him, at least this year. It certainly seems like it so far. Looking at the Raiders, Josh Jacobs, 28 carries last week, 120 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was also targeted twice. Excuse me. The first game for Darren Waller with less than 5 targets, and the second most targets on the season for Hunter Renfrow. I don't know if that was a direct correlation between the two. I think the Lions last week really tried to focus on Darren Waller and take him out of the game, which really opened things up for Hunter Renfrow. On the last Raider drive, 66 yards on 4 plays from Jalen Richard, which set up the touchdown to Hunter Renfrow. But besides that, Josh Jacobs really dominated the ball. You might look back and see that Jalen Richard had, what did he have? About 70 total yards and that touchdown. Or I'm sorry, about 70 total yards and 3 catches. And you might think, oh man, they're starting to use him a little bit more, trying to, wean off Josh Jacobs, but that's not the case at all. So I'm playing Jacobs, I'm playing Darren Waller, I'm playing Tyrell Williams. If I'm hurting, I'm playing Hunter Renfrow too. He's been playing a lot better. For the Chargers, obviously the 2 running backs, and then Hunter Henry, Mike Williams, and I guess Keenan Allen. I mean, I don't know how you can sit him, but it's just it hasn't looked good for him this year so far. So that's going to do it for part 1. That's all of the AFC home games. Tomorrow I'm going to sit down and record all the NFC home games in part 2. Make sure you tune in for that. Thanks. And as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. For more episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Beers and Bruisers is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach TV, or your favorite podcast service. Beers and Bruisers is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com or download the free HC Universal Network app today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gaming operates a national problem gambling helpline network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Beers and Bruisers Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to drink responsibly and always look for your man downfield.